The numbers for Astrobot have finally been released. According to Sony, this game has sold 1.5 million units. After one of the biggest shill campaigns of the year, after all that shilling from game journals, people declaring it to be the Mario killer, all that hype, all that publicity, every YouTuber bending over backwards to suck this game's robo cock, right? Seeing everybody just try and say this was like better than Mario. 1.5 million. Amazing. After all of that, they probably lost all that money on the ad campaigns for it because there's no way anybody was completely genuine when they were gushing about this game. I don't believe a single person I saw talking about it liked the game on its own merits and really only covered it because Sony told them to, right? Like I don't trust these people at all, but yeah, 1.5 million units. This is worth bringing up. This is worth talking about because it is it's exactly how I said it would be, right? Because the Game Journos did the same thing they always do when Sony wants to hype up a 3D platformer, right? Whether it's Crash Bandicoot or Knack or this, they do the same thing where they have this initial huge hype wave where they try to say it's like darker and edgier Mario. It's more creative, more innovative. It has better particle effects or whatever. It's a completely original 3D platformer with no influences from Nintendo games at all, right? They do this thing where they hype the product up as like, some big Mario killer, release some initial statements like, "Oh, this game far outsold Super Mario Bros. Wonder." And the reality is quite a bit different. And I called this out for what it is when I first saw it, right? Because to me, this was like a rerun of what they did with Knack. Like almost the exact same thing, the exact same talking points, the hype cycle. Like, look at how good this game looks, guys. Like, uh, it was the same kind of like narrative being pushed. This idea that Astrobot was this new IP. It's not new. It was this new 3D platformer that gave Mario a run for its money, right? They were seriously releasing statements saying this is like one of the best 3D platformers ever made. It was better than every Mario game ever released. It had outsold every Mario game ever released. This is one of the PlayStation 5's premier titles. And obviously, this was just an attempt at like trying to circumvent the PlayStation 5 has no games thing because like nobody's really happy with them right now. But it really didn't stick. After the hype cycle was over, after the Snoys finished their like 15-hour platformer or whatever, like the reality is that like, Nintendo fans looked at this thing. They looked at how it ripped elements like straight out of like Pikmin or Mario Galaxy or Sunshine or whatever, and just kind of laughed at it and went back to like watching the Brothership trailer again. There was no justifying the hype cycle around Astrobot in my opinion. Like this thing should not have made been on anyone's radar at all. And I'm really tired of seeing this happen with every PlayStation game that gets released, whether it's Jack and Daxter or Ratchet and Clank or Crash Bandicoot. Like none of those games can even come close to what Nintendo accomplishes, right? And yet every single time we're supposed to believe they're competitors or that there's some major success story, and it's always from people who have like nothing but contempt for platformers, who have nothing but contempt for like these kind of uh these kind of more like 90s games, right? These are people who just hate this stuff when it's on Nintendo platforms. But oh man, when Sony puts out a platformer, oh suddenly it's like the coolest thing ever. Like, oh, look at Astrobot Dance. Look at all these Super Smash Bros. Characters in Astro Bot. Like, ooh, there's Solid Snake. Ooh, there's Ryu and Ken. They've never been in a Nintendo crossover game before. Like, so many of these people were like trying to get excited. Like, oh man, there's a level based on God of War. Like Soy Face. Like, they tried so hard to sell people on this thing, and it fell completely flat. Nobody was into it. Nobody. And the past couple of weeks have demonstrated that this was completely astroturfed and fake, right? This was the very definition of what I'm talking about when I say a game is astroturfed, right? When a game has an unprecedented rise to relevancy only to completely fall off after a couple of weeks. For really good games, people will keep talking about them throughout the year and throughout the console generation. But for something like this, it has its moment in the sun and then it just completely vanishes like it never existed to begin with. And this is a near constant with PlayStation games, right? Uncharted's a good example. The Last of Us is a good example. Killzone is a good example. Horizon Zero Dawn, Ghost of Tsushima, uh, like all of the Last Guardian, even like you have like it's pretty common for PlayStation IPs to just get all of this critical hype and praise, like it's the best-selling game ever made, like, and it's just all completely fake. It just has no basis in reality whatsoever. So when you really look at the current state of gaming, when you look at what these people are doing and what they're trying to sell you, like first of all, like you have to understand it's fake, right? You have to understand that Astrobot is not a successful IP. It's essentially the Hi-Fi Rush of this year. Actually, like Hi-Fi Rush outsold it. Like holy shit! Like Hi-Fi Rush outsold Astrobot. That's crazy to think about. But and it's the Hi-Fi Rush of this year, right? Where people spent so much time hyping it up and doing this thing like, oh man, like Tango GameWorks is really going to expand after this success. And what happens? Like Microsoft fires them all, and they're all like, living in boxes on the side of the street. Like it's just like you're not ever going to see a sequel to Hi-Fi Rush because of that, right? After all that hype, all that publicity, all those narratives about how it was game of the year in January, right? Like after all of that, it completely fell flat on its face. And Astrobot is the same way, right? People made a big deal about this, like, oh, it's a game made by former PlayStation team devs, like yeah, the same guys that Sony fired. Like people will say things like, "Oh, they had a small team." That's unheard of in this day and age. Like not if you're a Nintendo fan. They made a cartoony 3D platformer. You never see those anymore unless you're a Nintendo fan. Like they did it for the passion. They respect the players like Nintendo does. Like again, what exactly did Astrobot do that Nintendo did not do better, right? Like, what exactly was so special about Astrobot? Like, as it stands now, I don't expect anybody is going to remember or care about Astrobot like by the turn of the year, right? Like I bet there's gonna be like some talk about it in the Game Awards and then it's gonna be forgotten. It's gonna be like Hi-Fi Rush. It's gonna be like Baldur's Gate 3. It's gonna be like stuff like that. It Takes Two, stuff like that. Like there's going to be all this hype, all this worship, all this like all these narratives put out there, right? They're going to do everything they possibly can, and at the end of the day, it's not going to leave much of an impact at all, right? They only managed 1.5 million units after declaring the game to be bigger than Mario. Like this really needs to be called out. Like I am so tired of seeing marketers and shills pull these stunts. Okay, like it really needed to be called out immediately. And plenty of people did. I did. I saw a handful of other people do it. Eventually when like Sony fans started becoming aggressive with pushing the game, people started pushing back against it. But like it really should have happened sooner, I feel like. Like I don't understand why Snoys are so willing to be brainwashed in regards to this kind of thing. Because you saw this back in the 90s too. Like the Crash Bandicoot team will still try to tell you that like Crash was bigger than Mario in the 90s, which is like obviously retarded when you look at like Mario Party alone outsold all the Crash games. But um you see just how all these games just you see just how all of this collapses. Like none of it works, none of it comes together. Like Nintendo always wins. You know, like it's this is just one example of it. This is one that's going to quickly fade into obscurity, much like Knack did in 2013, but we cannot afford to allow this to happen ever again. It is an absolute embarrassment to the gaming community.